Welcome back to the Elias Macko Show. Now, this week, Canada Bread agreed to pay at least $50 million for its role in fixing the price of the staple, bread, for years. And that has some anti-poverty advocates saying that the money should go back to the consumer. But instead, the massive fine will be deposited straight into the government's coffers. Let's talk about bread price fixing in this country and what should happen to that settlement money. Jennifer A. Quaid joins us now from the University of Ottawa, law professor at the university. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Hi, Elias. Thanks for having me on.
So you know what? Can you just demystify everything here when it comes to bread price fixing in this country? Of course, we've got the news from this week. I remember, and now, you know, memory sometimes goes with years, right? I remember Loblaw sent me like $25 in a gift card once over bread, I'm pretty sure. So why don't you tell me a little bit about this case, the Canada Bread price fixing case, and where all of that stands?
All right. Well, the story does go back a fair number of years, and you are correct that you've got a distant memory of receiving a $25 gift card. So I guess the Canadian public first found out that the prices for a wide range of breads were being fixed back in 2016, 2017, when Loblaws and Weston bakeries basically admitted that they had done that. And they did that in the context of a special program that exists run by the Competition Bureau, which oversees, markets and competition in Canada and is, sort of the primary enforcer in that space. They have a program that they do in partnership with the Public Prosecution Service of Canada that is called the Immunity and Leniency Program. And the idea is, because it's really hard to figure out when things like price fixing are happening, they create an incentive for companies to come in and rat out their conspirators, because these are always conspiracies, right? So you got to give a carrot, because there's no way that from the outside you can discover those things are going on. It's very, very rare. You need a whistleblower or you need someone to come in. And so the way to make them come in is to say the first one in gets a free pass in the following way, that they will not be charged and prosecuted. However, full cooperation is expected. And so you got to provide names, you've got to provide information, and that all has to be checked out. And the idea is that allows the investigation to get going and to get enough information to do search warrants or whatever, collect the evidence you need. So it's when Loblaws came in and said those things that then all of a sudden the names of other big grocers and other big bakeries came out. Everyone else denied involvement. And although you might say that you expect that, that isn't actually typically how the playbook works out. This program has existed for a long time, and it, follows a similar program that exists in the United States. And there's some pretty big conspiracies involving multinationals that were taken down this way. And usually what happens is the first one goes in, and then everyone rushes to come in second or third. So they get what's called leniency, which means you still have to plead guilty. You still will be hit with financial consequences, but less. You get a discount because you come in earlier and you can provide more evidence to get the stragglers. That's how we found out about it. But the conspiracy itself apparently started in 2001 and went all the way to 2015.
Unbelievable.
A long time. Yep.
Unbelievable. The fine for Canada Bread, the highest price fixing penalty in Canadian legal history. They received the maximum fine possible. It was $70 million, and they got a 30% leniency discount. As you were outlining there, what happens with leniency in certain scenarios. So now we have this. So it's $50 million that they're paying, and I think the consumers and consumer advocates are saying, okay, give that back straight to the consumer. Why isn't that happening here? What is happening with the money?
So this is what's interesting for someone like me who has done criminal law and competition law for a long time. There's nothing special about the fact that the money is going to the Receiver General. All fines get paid to the Receiver General. That's the rule. That's the default. Fines do not get paid to the victims. Victims have a very, secondary and unusual place in the criminal law system, because the criminal law system is about the state, which is representing the collectivity of citizens, and the accused, whoever that is. And so the outcome of that case and the purpose of criminal prosecution is not to compensate victims. It's to dissuade, to denounce, to seek rehabilitation, to, get the offender to recognize their responsibility. There is an acknowledgement of the harm caused, But the purpose of criminal law is not to be a direct compensatory system. Normally, the expectation is that there will be a civil case, and that actually is happening in Canada Bread, and we're in relation to the price fixing in bread, because there are two class actions, one in Ontario and one in Quebec, that are ongoing. But it's for sure, I understand the sort of, the idea that saying, well, why can't we get that money? But that's, the criminal law system is, the fines are calculated not as a function of how much harm was caused. Mm-hmm. Generally, it's as a function of, what did the offender do and what's their degree of culpability? So like, were they really awful about this? Did it require a lot of planning? And were they really secretive about it? Is this something that's more on the edge where you think, okay, there were some factors that maybe reduce the amount of culpability? So that doesn't change the guilty plea, right? But when we design sentences in Canada, we have an individualized system that says we've got to look at each offender and their circumstances. So that's why the money is not actually, the amount of a fine is not calculated that way. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a different question, which is, should we have more compensation, like as part of the process? It's possible. It's provided for in the criminal code. It's possible to provide for compensation for victims. But typically that's where you have very clearly identified victims and you can clearly identify the harm. But it's not, by no stretch of the imagination, the standard. And I've done a study on this, and it's not, absolutely not the norm for corporate crime.
We're with Jennifer Quaid, law professor at University of Ottawa. We're talking about the settlement in the big Canada Bread price fixing fiasco. So Jennifer, let me ask you, if fines like this, do they really work to root out practices where you've got price fixing? Like, are there other industries, is Big Orange Juice or Big whatever, do they look at fines like this and say, okay, this is a strong encouragement never to try and do something similar?
Honestly, Elias, that is the million, if not billion-dollar question. I think most people would agree that there is some association between fines, and especially big fines, and corporate compliance or interest in developing compliance programs, but it's not a clear causation. And I think, researchers have been trying, for more than 50 years to sort of establish scientifically that deterrence works, that penalties promote. It's not that clear cut. There is a school of thought that says you really have to throw people in jail. You really have to go after the executive. That sounds like a nice idea, but in Canada, we just don't have a strong tradition of that. And you very quickly get yourself up against the strongest criminal law protections. It's not easy to throw people in jail. But I think that it is clear that big fines are things that at least corporate organizations and companies will pay attention to. I think the other factor, though, is how likely is it that they get caught? It's not just the amount of the fine. And that is where you have to have what I call a credible threat. You have to have a prosecution service and an investigation capacity that suggests that, there's a risk that I'm going to get caught. And if I'm going to get caught, the book's going to get thrown at me and it's going to hurt. So I think that that's maybe where, we're not as strong because it's not maybe quite as much of a threat. But I think it exists. And I think that, things like this fine will make a difference going forward. Okay, very much in the future. But going forward, now there won't be a limit on the fines that can be imposed for cartels, but that only applies for all cartels that were created after June 23rd, 2023. So
okay.
A little bit in the future.
Just quickly here, because I am out of time, but do we know, do we have an indication of just how much money they made from the price fixing? Was it much more than $50 million?
We don't have the details,
okay.
Unfortunately. Yeah. It's something where you'd have to go and dig into the court files if it was provided. But certainly we know how much sales they made, which was, in excess of $1 billion. Gotcha. But that isn't necessarily the amount from the price fixing. And, that's that's one of the problems is understanding the numbers. And I agree with you that piece of information is not clear at the moment. Really interesting discussion, Jennifer. Thank you so much. You have a great weekend. You too. Bye. That is Jennifer Quaid, law professor at the University of Ottawa. When we return on the Elias Macko Show, in transit for Friday, we do gripes, we do kudos, and we'll also discuss the left lane on the highway. What is the left lane for? We're going to get your take coming up next.